Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Undiscovered Metric, where each month we interview industry leaders and explore how to measure what matters and stay ahead of the trends shaping marketing's future. I'm your host, Mark, and today we're joined by Jonathan Sweeney, who is the Senior Director of Data at Game Theory, and we're going to be discussing how marketers can make the best use of marketing mix modeling, or MMM. Jonathan, welcome to the Undiscovered Metric. Before we jump into it, could you tell me a little bit about what you do at Game Theory, like what your role involves, what your day-to-day role includes, and how you got into it? I'd be fascinated to hear more about that.
Amazing. Well, thank you for having me on. A little bit of stuff around me, I guess. I started out in digital performance marketing, which kind of gave me a really good grounding on the world of marketing and, more importantly, digital marketing, which has basically been a sort of really big sort of growth area. My role has sort of moved from more of a sort of data product focus, so multi-touch attribution and that kind of world, into being more of a specific focus, especially over the sort of past 10 years at Game Theory, into actually sort of leading and enabling a data team.
That sounds pretty cool. Many thanks for explaining that. Um, you mentioned there about how your role has evolved and you built out this team. And I can imagine that your team has to keep up with different trends and shifts in how data is used to get the most out of it. And what I find particularly interesting about what you said there is that like marketing mix modeling has been around for a long time, like decades really. But during that time, like much how your role has changed, that digital landscape as well has changed dramatically. But yet marketing mix modeling has been around for a long time. So how do you think marketing mix modeling has evolved based on that digital landscape? And my follow-up question to that also would be, what do you think marketers need to rethink in light of those changes?
So the game theory's been around for pretty much most of that time in one form or another. They were sort of one of the pioneers of sort of econometrics via MMM to really sort of help get that understanding of effectiveness as far back as the 1970s. And as you say, the real big change there has been is digital. So digital has brought huge amounts of new data, huge amounts of structures that just didn't exist prior to that. And also a change in sort of mentality of advertising. So things are thinking more sort of lower funnel tactics, sort of short-term goals. I'd say MMM has evolved to adapt to those changes. The methodologies behind it, the modeling approaches that are used are sort of built to get a better insight into the detail of digital, which is much more varied and much sort of wider spread than in other sort of areas of marketing.
And you were saying that it didn't quite live up to the promise before?
It's more that the world of MTA, sort of almost sort of back when I was starting out in sort of digital marketing, most things were sort of tracked through the ad server, and you had a lot of singular sort of customer data. So you could get a really good understanding of, in the digital space at least, customer saw an ad, saw an ad, saw an ad, went on to do a digital conversion.
Mhm.
So that all worked through sort of cookies and tracking and all of that piece. As things have changed in the marketplace, as I sort of one of the real big things has been sort of GDPR and sort of cookie consent. It's made it harder to get that same level of data. It's still sort of possible to bring data sets together to do that. It's just made it a lot more of a challenge than having a readily available data set that you can just build MTA from. You've also got sort of the issues of data silos of you have your metadata over here, you have your Google data over here, and bringing that all together is, again, becomes a bit of a challenge. And I say it's not insurmountable, but it's led to it becoming, I'd say, almost unattainable for especially the people that don't have the level of investment to work in sort of data clean rooms and those kind of spaces. So that's why sort of people that are wanting that insight, that are wanting to get more than just a sort of last touch view, are looking to MMM to provide them an understanding of what really is the world. And I think one of the real sort of key things is that MMM itself also isn't a silver bullet. It's not going to give
Mm,
you the overall answer. It's a really important tool as part of a sort of a best-in-class strategy when you're sort of building out what you're doing in terms of marketing measurement. But you shouldn't really just rely on MMM alone. It
mm.
can provide you that great strategic view of sort of what's driving performance of your KPIs. But you should always look to sort of more sort of a holistic view of that. So all encompassing of all the different parts of your sort of customer journey, both at the sort of very short term, but also sort of
Mm.
going beyond MMM the other way into the very long term as well. You kind of need to ensure that you're sort of getting an understanding of the wider picture of your marketing.
That makes sense, Jonathan. Thanks for explaining that. And just you mentioned there about the short term and long term. I suppose whether you're going to start either on that short or that long, what's really important is the foundation before that. So the data that gets fed into it. What would you say brands should be doing from the very beginning to ensure that they're building data quality into the very beginning of that process for both the short term and the long term? Like, how can they make sure they're on the right track rather than just like retrospectively fixing issues later on, which is way harder? Like, what do you think they can do to set them best up for success?
Really, at the base of it, really, it's making sure you've got data that sort of demonstrates both of those objectives. So if you've got sort of short-term data and you can show that short-term, but you don't have any view on long-term, then it's very hard to then basically sort of do. And we've encountered that sort of in multiple instances where they said we need a view on long-term, and then we said, well, what information have you got to track your long-term changes? And they've got no way to actually understand it. So that's a real sort of key piece of it. When you've got that kind of information, MMM enables you to see really the trade-offs and decisions. So if you build an MMM that has an understanding of that sort of short-term performance that you're getting from your marketing and has a view to sort of how your long-term potential sort of brand shifts could come in, when you come to those kind of conversations, you can see that, well, if I want to try and increase my brand awareness, then there may be some sort of potential negative impacts on my short-term sales, and have that in
Mm,
a model that you can basically almost flex and sort of optimize to say what you want to achieve. Do you want to heavily weight into brand building and know that this is the kind of impact that you'll see there? Or do you go, actually, at the moment, we really want to focus on short-term sales. We've got a sales gap and we need to do that. And know that if you focus your marketing in a way that drives that piece, you're not going to get that same long-term sort of brand building sort of piece that will come with that. So it's really when you're going and asking for budget and basically speaking to the team to get that, making them understand that piece so that when it comes down to reviewing the activity, you can say, well, yes, we did say that this was likely going to have an impact. Because as the next time the budget comes round, it's important to have that knowledge and sort of repetition of these are the trade-offs that we have when trying to sort of build out a mixed campaign, I'd say, both sort of short-term and long-term performance.
that makes sense. It also sounds like it's a fair bit of like expectation management there, and also trying to give that the holistic picture rather than just getting sort of stuck in the particular detail of one data point or another.
Yeah, very much so. And I think it's one of the sort of handy pieces really of sort of econometric and MMM analysis is that it is looking at a much sort of wider view of this
I
piece.
suppose there's all these internal kind of levers that you can affect and you can pull at different points, whether it's in the short term or the long term. But then there's a whole bunch of external ones that may be happening in the market, which are, outside of your control to actually change. But you need to give that whole picture of this is what we think is happening, and this is perhaps what should happen next. Um,
Exactly.
Makes a lot of sense. With all of that in mind, if you could give one piece of advice to anybody listening to this or watching the video, what would you say to a marketing leader who is struggling with making their marketing mix modeling work for them? What would that piece of advice be that you'd really want them to take from this?
I'd say almost take a step back from the MMM. really what you want to be looking at is you've got goals that you're trying to achieve with your measurement. How does that align with your wider business? There can often be a sort of mismatch between sort of the metric and KPI that you're measuring to what you're actually trying to achieve as a business, especially if it's been something like a marketing effectiveness program that's been around for a while and the business has shifted, but the program hasn't adjusted to that. Um, so when you're actually sort of bringing in your marketing strategy, it should be informed by that business strategy as well. And in turn, that should inform how you're doing your measurement. And that's across whether it's MMM or any other kind of approaches you're doing. You kind of need to make sure that what you're trying to understand and what you're trying to sort of move the needle on is something that's actually that sort of valuable to the business. So if you're working on a KPI that's literally just pure short-term sales, and the business is not looking currently at short-term sales, they're looking at how they can grow the business over the next 10 years, then you're going to not be hitting the points that they want to see. And I think that's really a sort of a key element that needs to be thought about when trying to get MMM to work for you.
It sounds to me that it's kind of regularly making sure that what your modeling is doing and what it's measuring and what it's optimized for, that's actually still regularly meeting those commercial needs of the business or of a client. So how do you how do you manage that?
Yeah, it's fully sort of communication. Um,
Mm,
the real piece is trying to sort of bring in I'd say, data informed culture within the whole organization. We we often have data in sort of disparate locations all over the business, and it makes sort of marketing a challenge because and also makes marketing effectiveness a challenge because when we want to do the analysis, we have to source that data. One of the real key things I can recommend is trying to sort of bring some kind of centralization and governance over that data, but done so with the knowledge of marketing. Because
mm,
basically, if you have that knowledge as part of that data build, it will help shape ensuring that that data is practical and useful for what you're trying to do and achieve down the line. And that if that data is available and accessible to all as well, both the input data that might be useful for somebody to go off and come up with their own analysis or reports or research, but also the outputs, making sure
mm.
the outputs of the econometric analysis, the MMM, the whichever analysis you're doing is also available to everyone to review. It makes it much more engaged in the whole situation and make sure that everybody's on board and wants to actually help drive getting more insight that's useful for them.
I love that so much, Jonathan. It feels as though this kind of getting everyone on board with having this sort of strong understanding of data so you can have meaningful conversations. That only really starts if you kind of actually all establish what is it that we're trying to achieve as a business and then building that foundation from there and then scaling up from that point. And then the regular communication alongside that to make sure that you're all, kind of working towards the same goal and there's no hidden surprises later on.
Yeah, I mean, I say fundamentally, sharing of knowledge is probably the most powerful thing we can do as sort of both marketers and just within businesses. The more knowledge that everybody has, the more value that they can sort of work from and actually understand themselves. It's amazing how much insight that we can provide to other parts of a business. They can see useful information for them from what we're delivering, whether it be a seasonal trend that hadn't been picked up
Mm.
before, whether it be activity that one team didn't realize was sort of having as much as a halo value onto other parts of the business. All of those kind of things that you just wouldn't know unless that information is shared. So really sort of democracy of information is a huge plus.
I love that. Yeah, democratizing access to the data. I'm just going to sort of go into like a few like sort of I don't really want to call them like quick fire questions, but it's questions that we always ask every guest. But so one of them is like the name of this show is the Undiscovered Metric. Part of the reason for that is because there's many things that we do, there's many KPIs that we all look at, different metrics, and they all have various benefits. But there's some that give us advantages if we focus on them. So, what I'd love to hear from you, Jonathan, is what would you say is the undiscovered metric to really get ahead of the competition?
I mean, amusingly, the terminology used there is pretty much sort of perfect, which is the competition. We've talked a lot about what the brand or the client or the company or whichever way you want to look at it has themselves. They have the marketing, they have the KPIs. What we generally sort of forget to talk about is, well, what's going on with our competition? How much have they spent in marketing? Where are they spending it? And those kind of pieces. And in a sort of MMM model, that is incredibly important because how competitive you need to be in the marketplace can really sort of have an impact on the value you get returned from your marketing. It also gives you ability to benchmark your investments and see sort of, well, how is it performing in the presence of my competitors? But also really, how is it performing when your competitions go silent? I mean, when you've generally got to the situations of economic uncertainty, I'm putting no commentary on top of that at the moment. But when that kind of thing is happening, you can often find that you'll see sort of pullbacks in spending, and those can be huge opportunities to be the only voice in a vertical or a space to really sort of get home your message. So being able to make use and leverage that kind of knowledge is huge. And definitely competitive spend is the overlooked metric that I'd say is every marketer should be sort of paying more attention to.
That's really useful. It makes so much sense as well. I suppose also it adds a lot of context in terms of what you're doing, whether it's good or bad, or if there's an opportunity there. And as you said, benchmarking, though, that's very, very valuable. Um, Next question is, we touched upon this a little bit before. Is that what would you say are some common mistakes that marketers make when they're trying to put together a data strategy?
And this is something I've seen sort of time and again, trying to sort of focus on doing everything all at once. So trying to get the speed, the capability, the sort of everything being all encompassed all in one go, rather than focusing over initial goals and accuracy of the data they've got. The old adage of garbage in, garbage out is never
Mm.
more true than with marketing data. And sourcing just the right data for the job is such an important piece of that. And sort of understanding what you want to sort of see and measure and analyze, and then working backwards to the data that you need. Just having the data you need allows you to be able to validate that it's correct more easily. So once you've got that sort of right data, you can get your sort of right results out that first time. And I'd say the idea of having everything perfect first time, I would say, is a way to ensure you get no results. And I always say some results are better than no results. Once you've got that in place, though, look to what you can do to improve speed. And also go, once you've got that data together, go, well, what else can I do with this data? So really, that would be what I'd say is make sure that you're not trying to sort of burn the world trying to get everything to be perfect the first time round. Having started on enough projects over my time is the first one will give you insight. It will not give you the perfect insight. A really good example of this would have been an MTA project I was involved with a long time ago that was trying to ensure it covered every single possible source of digital marketing that they had, and even tried to bring in some of the offline marketing as well. The problem being was getting the data to align and working in sort of, I think it was pseudo clean room spaces sort of back in the day prior to real data clean rooms existing as they do now, but trying to work to bring in all this information and aligning that data and getting it to a point where it could all fit together was sort of on almost impossible task because there was pieces that just didn't match. So you had to go and find another tool to try and match those two things together. and then you'd realize it doesn't quite do the job, or it causes another issue somewhere else down the line. So you're constantly sort of reaching for that next goal. And in that case, that was one that eventually just ran out of budget. The amount of time that was spent trying to achieve this perfect solution of MTA that covered every possible thing meant that they had never actually got any insight out of that whole program, because they would not accept insight that didn't have every single possible impact. And some of the impacts were likely never to have a sort of any real true impact in there anyway, but it was something that they'd spent money on, so they wanted it included in that analysis. So it's a really hard thing to see, and it was really sort of frustrating that we never actually got to a final point and achieved it. That is the challenge, and that is an expectation setting that we as sort of marketers, and I say very happy that sort of Game Theory is in a situation where we can be more sort of truthful in that kind of situation of saying no, this is something that is the way that we would like to do this is to give you insight. And I think that's the real sort of key thing, is that the value is not the solution, it's the insight that comes from it. The what next, or what can we do? That is the value, and making sure that that comes across is probably the key piece that we need to do.
I love that. Definitely, that's makes so much sense, and I think that's the kind of example that you only really understand the importance of having those best practice steps set up at the beginning if you've gone through that process before, sort of to understand how valuable it is, that you're not just saying it for the sake of it, but this is what will happen later on. You won't get those insights. I just want to go back to something I asked at the start, where we were talking about how all the changes that have happened in digital, and how that's changed the landscape and that's changed marketing mix modeling. Like, with these changes happening every day, Jonathan, how do you stay up to date with everything? Like, what are your go-to resources for marketing news and trends?
Given our sort of work with them and that kind of piece as well, we sort of worked with Walk quite a bit, and it's a source that we sort of use quite heavily and help provide our insight into as well. I will admit, just keeping abreast of what's going on in marketing, the likes of sort of Campaign and Ad Age and those kind of publications that just have general sort of marketing news. Not to be cheesy, but I do listen to marketing podcasts as well, such as the one I'm on today. But weirdly, especially in the sort of marketing data space, there isn't as much general information out there, especially in the kind of systems. And a lot of information I get comes from sort of random blog articles on Medium. So there's a lot of people that work in the sort of marketing data space, especially some of the developers that are working on the underlying pieces. And the insight you can only really get from them, because there's not really the same level of news source for the kind of areas that I kind of work in that way. The general marketing space, definitely, but in the sort of the nuts and bolts and the sort of back end piece, it's very much an underrepresented area. And I think this podcast is a great place for this, because it basically brings some of those topics to light.
Definitely, I'd love to hear that. Makes a lot of sense what you said, that on some of these things, that like there's a specific kind of angle, there's a niche that needs to have voice. Definitely have seen some similar ones, like long form articles in Medium, that you're like, yes, finally at last someone's talking about this. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insights. Really appreciate your time. And also thank you to our listeners and to anyone watching the video as well. If you enjoyed this episode, then please like, comment, subscribe, rate the podcast, all that good stuff. And so subscribe so you make sure you never miss an episode. Until next time, keep exploring those undiscovered metrics.